our title today, and as you see, we are going to study a journey from Egypt to Canaan. And Sister Tabitha, in the break time, we were discussing and we were talking that everything here will pass. Do you agree with that? Amen. Everything here will pass, and I think Haley gave me another illustration that when people came to build something in their home, and something wasn't perfect, and the builder said, "Don't worry, because it will burn anyway. It will burn anyway." So, what the reason I'm bringing this to our attention is to know that this is not our home. This is not our home. Before we go to today's title, let us remember, for those of you who were here last time when I presented, do you remember what was the sermon 1 month ago when I was here? About the horse. That's a good point to remember. Yes, thank you. So we studied about a consistent life. So we looked at the life of Daniel and his friends that came from where? From Jerusalem to Babylon. And do you remember what Babylon signifies in the Bible? Confusion, sin. What about Jerusalem? The city of God, the place where God dwells, right? So now if we remember more, there was a question there. What does Babylon use to integrate us? You remember that, right? Music. Music, yes, that's a good point. Food, education, and also a change of names. So the reason I brought this in our attention is because today we study about Egypt and Canaan. Do you know what Egypt means? What does Egypt signify in the Bible? Yes, and also Babylon and Egypt, they symbolize sin, house of sin. What about Canaan? Where do you hear this word, Canaan? Heavenly Canaan, a promised land. So in other words, we see that we learned last time that Daniel and his friends, they went to Babylon. Babylon tried to integrate them. What do you think? We are promised the heavenly Canaan, as Brother Patrick mentioned. Do you think that Egypt is trying to integrate us as well? Because that's the promise. We are traveling, and I mentioned already that this is not our home. And probably you know that song, that this world is not our home, and probably we sing it sometime. Do you think that Egypt is trying to integrate us as well? Yes. Let us look more into this. And when we look at this image, this statement from Egypt to Canaan, what illustration comes into your mind?
The Exodus from the Israelites.
The Exodus from the Israelites. So God had a plan with his people. They've been there as slaves, 400 years altogether. And the promise was that one day they will be where? In the promised land, which is called Canaan there. And if you look at that, who had this promise first? Abraham, right? So the promise was there since the time of Abraham. And if we think about that, was Abraham able to see that land? Let's read together. We turn our Bibles to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews 11, and we read from verse 8 to 10. Hebrews 11, verse 8 to 10, and we read the following. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should, after receiving for an inheritance, what did he do? He said that he obeyed. And he went out, not knowing whither he went. So here, your brother Patrick mentioned that he saw this country by faith, spiritual. When he was called to come out, did he know where he is going to? No. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the place that Abraham came out from. It was really comfortable there. And probably you may think that even in those times, they didn't have cars as we do have, but they had even current water in the houses. Like they could take showers probably like the same way we can take it today. And if you think about that, that was an advanced place, an advanced technology for that time. Abraham had this in his house. Yes, and then he was called to come out. Did he know where he went, where he would go? He said that not knowing whither he went, but he asked him acted by faith. So we go to the verse 9. It says that by faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. So the Lord promised him that land, and yet, how did he dwell in that country? As a stranger. Why? Why as a stranger? We remember later on that even when his wife passed away, what did he have to do to bury his wife? He had to buy a piece of land there. Even though this was the promise that God gave it to him to be his home, the home for his seed, and yet he lived as a stranger there. And why was he a stranger? And I'd like you to look at the next verse, verse 10, which says that for he looked for a city which has foundation, whose builder and maker is God. So in other words, even though the promise was for him, he knew that this is not my home. What was he expecting, in fact? He was looking for a city whose foundation and whose builder and maker is God. So he was not even expecting to dwell or to inherit that land here on earth, but looking forward for that better country. He was longing for a better country. And in the same book, the same chapter, verse 13, we read about the other men of faith. And it says that these all, including with Abraham and Isaac and all the others, says that these all died, how? In faith, not having received the promise, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers, pilgrims on the earth. So going back to what we were discussing in the break time here. And also during the Sabbath school lesson, Brother Nehemiah made it clear. What are we, in fact? Are we gold? We try to be refined as gold, purified for God's kingdom, but we are made of dust, right? So everything that is here will pass away. And also, if you look at the last book of the Bible, John, what does he see? He sees a new heaven and a new earth. And this is what Abraham and the others were looking forward to. And if we look at the Spirit of Prophecy comments on this and says that Patriarchs and Prophets 137 is talking about Abraham. It says that the voice of God was heard, bidding him not to expect immediate possession of the promised land, and pointing forward to the sufferings of his posterity before their establishment in Canaan. And the next paragraph says that the plan of redemption was here open to him in the death of Christ, the great sacrifice, and his coming in glory. Abraham saw also the earth restored to its Eden beauty, to be given him for an everlasting possession as the final and complete fulfillment of the promise. So as you read this, you can tell that he wasn't even expecting this land. I mean the earthly land. Because in vision, God showed him. What did he see in the vision? You see that he saw also the earth restored in its beauty, and he wanted the fulfillment of that promise. And the question for us today is, why do we need to learn about this. Probably if we think it like years, how many years passed from the time of Abraham, from the time of the Israelites to today, probably we would say, well, we are living in a modern world today. We don't need this to study it again. Why do you think that these examples are there in the Bible? Romans chapter 15, verse 4 says that for whatsoever things were written aforetime were written why? For our learning. And what can we learn from this? Patience, yes. Also faith that Abraham was called, right? And he obeyed. But also today we are going to look more deeper into the experience of the Israelites. So we know that the promise came to Abraham. Abraham also saw that they will be in Egypt, where they will be slaves for a while, but the promise was still there. So do you think that when the promise, where the time came for the promise to be fulfilled, were the Israelites ready to receive it? Hmm? In, in part, yes. You know, sometimes when you are waiting for someone to come, like I would put Brother Alex here. We've been waiting for him to come back, right? So you wait for someone to come. And when that person comes, you say, well, I don't want to go and meet him. Let's look what happened in fact. Was Israel prepared for the deliverance? And we read this time in Exodus chapter 6, verses 6 to 9. And here we have the words that God, or the good news that God is bringing through Moses to the Israelites. Exodus 6, verses 6 to 9 says that, wherefore say unto the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will rid you out of their bondage, and I will redeem you with a stretched out arm, and with great judgments. So isn't this good news so far? They've been there for years in bondage, and you see here the burdens and all those things that they had to go through. And now the Lord sends this message to Moses that is the time came for you to come out. The next verse, verse 7, says that, and I will take you to me for a people, and I will be to you a God, and ye shall know that I am the Lord your God, which bringeth you out from under the burdens of Egyptians. Again, good news so far. But let's read further. Verse 8 says that, and I will bring you into the land concerning the which I did swear to give it to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And this was the promise that was given to Abraham. And I will give it to you for an heritage. I am the Lord. So far, good news. How did Israelites receive this good news? Let's read verse 9. It says that Moses spake so unto the children of Israel, but they hearkened not unto Moses, for anguish of spirit and for cruel bondage. What would you do in these cases? Like you've been waiting for something to happen, for a deliverance, and when the time comes, these people disbelieved it. He says that they hearkened not. They didn't even listen to what Moses is saying. Why? Because they were afraid, anguish of spirit and for cruel bondage. They were okay with what was going on, I guess. In Patriarchs and Prophets 260, paragraph 2, we read that the Hebrews had expected to obtain their freedom without any special trial of their faith or any real suffering or hardship. But they were not yet prepared for deliverance. So what was their problem? Lack of faith, yes. But also, as you look here, how were they expecting to be delivered? Mhm. You know, sometimes I'm thinking like when I had to go to school, there was no school buses. We had to walk like 3 miles to school, 3 miles back from school, and more than that, like in the winter time, we would get home frozen. And today, when you look, this I would say a comfortable ride Even maybe there are school buses, or if not, I'm sure that all of you who have children here, you wouldn't let them walk to school. Probably you would drive them to make sure that they are safe. So this is what the Israelites were looking at. They wanted themselves to get out of there without any special trial of their faith. They wanted to be perfect. So why were they not prepared? And Brother Patrick mentioned that they had no faith. Says that they had little faith in God and were unwilling patiently to endure their affliction until he should see fit to work for them. And now also it says that many were content to remain in bondage rather than meet difficulties attending removal to a strange land. And the habits of some had become so much like those of the Egyptians that they preferred to dwell in Egypt. So why were not they prepared to come out? We already mentioned some of them, like lack of faith. Also, they didn't want to see trials on the way. But if you compare those trials with the trials that they were going through, which trial is better? My country used to be under the communist reign, and during that time, a lot of people they were looking for freedom. So they were trying. They knew that if they are caught crossing the border, they would be either in prison or even killed sometimes. But they were still trying. Why were they trying? For a new life. They had that hope, and they wanted to try. If they would come out, it would be a joy. If not, at least they tried, right? So here, these people, it seems like when they saw, says that many were content to remain in bondage rather than try. Rather than meet the difficulties attending the removal to a strange land. Or we go there, then we have to build another house. We go there, we have to make new friends. There are many things that they could think of. But as you see here, the red lines, what was another problem? And remember, I asked the question, is Egypt trying to integrate us as well? You see that some had become so much like those of the Egyptians that they preferred to dwell in Egypt. Like they were not, even though by lineage they were the people of God, but at this time they would identify themselves as Egyptians. Liking what they like, that's kind of still lifestyle. And at this time, when God told them to come out, well, we like it here. And you know the story, but we just go through some of these points to learn a lesson for us. So if we think about our days, is it any different today? You know, always I'm thinking about the time when I was a child, and probably you heard around the year 2000, what was a good news for everyone? Yes, we thought that that's the end. We thought that Jesus comes around 2000. And for me as a child, I was maybe 5 years of age, and I was happy for that. Then later on, as I grew up, I had different perspectives. Like I wanted to go to a school, I wanted to get married, I wanted to have a house, and then I want Jesus to come. So if you think about that, are we ready today to be delivered into Canaan, to be taken from here to go to the heavenly Canaan? And Brother Dan made a comment during the Sabbath school saying that everyone has a hope, but many people have wrong hopes, like to have a better home, to have a better car, to have a better other things. So let's read in Proverbs chapter 1 to see how is it today compared to that time. Verses 24 to 33, and we read that, because I have called and ye refused, I have stretched out my hand, and no man regarded. But ye have set at naught all my counsel, and would none of my reproof. I will also laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh. And he says that when your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction cometh as a whirlwind, when distress and anguish cometh upon you, then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me. For that they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. They would none of my counsels, they despised all my reproof. Therefore shall they eat of the fruit of their own way, and be filled with their own devices. And the other verse 32 and 33 says that for the turning away of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. But whoso hearken unto me shall dwell safely, and shall be quiet from fear of evil. So if we look at even today, um, probably we are not ready to move on. And I know I mentioned that my country used to be under the communist reign. It was hard for them to have a job. And even though right now we are not living under the communist oppression, people don't like changes. Like even if they are meeting hardship in their job, they are afraid of losing it. And they keep it the same way. So the same here, the Lord says that, but whoso hearken unto me shall dwell safely and shall be quiet from fear of evil. And we read already about the reasons why the Egyptians, the Israelites, didn't want to come out of Egypt. They were not prepared. But if we look at us, are we becoming acquainted with this world? Are we attached to Egypt today? And when I say Egypt, I mean this world where we live today. Because when we look at it, it's not the best. Like we hear about family members getting sick. We hear people dying. And even I was thinking about what John mentions in the book of Revelation. There shall be no more pain, no more death. Can you imagine something like that? Because in our human imagination, it's hard to imagine that there is no pain when you hurt your fingers or something. That's impossible for us to imagine. So are we attached to Egypt today? And when we think of that, there is a reason. In Exodus chapter 20, verses 2 and 3, we have the first commandment. And probably many people say that that's why these commandments were for the Israelites at that time, because we were not in Egypt. Have you been to Egypt before? So to the physical Egypt, we have not been there. But what did we say that Egypt signifies? Sin. So where were we born? In the house of bondage, in the house of sin. And Jesus, by his grace, he brought us out. So are we attached to Egypt today? And I want to bring us an experience of someone else when the call came to come out. How was he looking to this call? And this is the experience of Lot, and this is relative of Abraham. So Abraham, we learned that when he was called, he came out by faith. And now this person, he says that when the morning arose, Genesis chapter 19, verse 15, when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy two daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. So if you remember the story, we know that the angels came to their city, talked to them, and at that time, what did Lot do? What did he do? He said, okay, let's go. What did he say? he went and talked to his family, to his sons-in-laws, to all his family, his relatives there. And the morning came, the angels told him, Arise, take thy wife and two daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity. And how did Lot and his family here react to this call? Were they ready to go? Let's look at the next verse, verse 16. While they lingered, what does it mean to linger? Hesitate, delay, thinking, should I go? Should I believe it? Should I stay? What should I do? And if you look at that, when you hesitate, if it's about us, what is easier to do? To decide to go or to stay when you hesitate? You stay. Because if you look at this verse, it says that the angels took him by hand. In other words, pushed him out from there. He wouldn't live by himself. While he lingered, the man laid hold upon his hand and upon the hand of his wife and upon the hand of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him. And they brought him forth and set him without the city. And what was the problem of Lot? Why did he hesitate, as Sister Hadley mentioned? Why did he hesitate? He was attached. And if you look, what was he attached to? In Patriarchs and Prophets 1:60 says that though daily distress at beholding deeds of violence, he had no true conception of the debasing and abominable iniquity practiced in the vile city. He did not realize the terrible necessity for God's judgments to put a check on sin. Some of his children clung to Sodom, and his wife refused to depart without them. So what happened to Lot here? We know that when Abraham left his country, he came with him. So in other words, he was educated, he was taught by Abraham, by the God of Abraham. And of course, there were some misunderstandings among themselves, and they had to depart. You know that story. And where did Lot decided to go? Where did he choose to go? Sodom, right? So I don't know how he, because we know that he had different flocks with sheep, with whatever he had there, his business. Probably he didn't go in the downtown, right? But as you see, as years pass, what happens to the cities? They grow. They grow. Like if you think about those who are more experienced and have been around here for a while, is Atlanta the same as it used to be 30 years ago? So probably even though Lot made his stand somewhere outside of the city grew. And it says also that because being there, what happened to his faith? What happened to his faith? Look at the red lines there. He had no true conception of the debasing and abominable iniquity practiced in that vile city. Didn't he know the will of God? Didn't he know God's commandments? But how did he get to this point? You know, sometimes when you look at something, the first time you think, oh, this is a strange thing. But when you look it again and you watch it again and again, that thing, you become used to it. So what used to be seen before in Lot's eyes, at this time he thought that, well, he had no true conception already anymore of the debasing and abominable iniquity practiced there. And that happened because he associated himself with the city life. Let's look at the next paragraph. It says that the thought of living Those who him held dearest on earth seemed more than he could bear. It was hard to forsake what? All his luxurious home and all the wealth acquired by the labors of his whole life, to go forth a destitute wanderer, stupefied with sorrow, he lingered, loath to depart. So, what made him hesitate when the time came for him to go? Beautiful house, all that was dearest to him, all the wealth he acquired. And at this time, he probably was retired by this time. To move, and you cannot take, because sometimes when you move here, you drive on the road, you see families moving, and you see 2 3 trucks moving. At this time, Lot, he couldn't take anything with him. We would say maybe only the character. And because of this, it was hard for him to depart. But going back to the Israelites in Egypt, why did they hesitate to depart? Did they have wealth? Did they have bank accounts there? You are going to laugh at these verses, but look, in chapter 11, in the book of Numbers, verse 4 and 5. What did they say? Who shall give us flesh to eat? They wept. When you wept, when a child cries, you know that he's not happy, right? So they wept. Who shall give us flesh to eat? And then how did they come with that question from? We remember the fish, which we did eat in Egypt freely, and also the cucumbers. Would you hesitate for cucumbers? The melons, and the leeks, and the onions, and the garlic. So in other words, they didn't have any physical possession there, but they hesitated because of what? Their stomach. Their stomach. So going back to the question, are we attached to Egypt today? What could keep us from leaving? Like if the call would come to move to a different country, just here on earth, what would make you hesitate? What about the heavenly Canaan? What would make you hesitate? You see that in the case of, because maybe you may say, well, we don't have so much wealth as Lot used to have, but we all eat. We all have that experience, at least what they had in Egypt, probably. They had to have the wilderness experience. It was hard for them to decide to leave because they were thinking that, well, if we would go without any trouble, we would go. But now, as they were going on the way towards Canaan, instead of looking forward, they remembered what they were eating there. So the Lord provided this wilderness experience to educate them. And there is a lesson that we should take from this today. And what was this wilderness experience? If you think about the experience of Moses, we know that he dwelt in the wilderness for a while before he was prepared to deliver the people. Why did he need that wilderness experience? How long did he spend in Egypt before that? Yes, Moses. 40 years, right? So what did he do during these 40 years? We know that 12 years he'd been with his mother, with his family. And then later on, he went where? To the school of Egypt. He learned there how to be a good soldier, right? A fighter. And when he was 40, after the 40 years, we see that he graduated from this school. Why didn't he go straight to deliver the people? Because as a good soldier, you could be fitted for that, right? But the Lord so fitted for him to go another 40 years in school. And this was, we see that he dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. And he'd been there doing, like, taking care of the sheep and being in the wilderness. He had to have that wilderness experience. And now if you compare that, the first school, the school in Egypt, and the school in the wilderness, which one was easier? Mhm. Well, in Egypt, he was like a prince, treated like a prince. If he wanted to eat, people would bring him food. If he didn't like the food, people could bring him something else. If he wanted to sleep, he could sleep wherever he wanted. Everything was perfect, right? And what about the wilderness experience? Look for the food. You cannot, like if when he was sleeping in Egypt, he had guards guarding him. But at this time, how can you sleep in the wilderness knowing that the wolves can come and steal your flock, right? But think about the wilderness experience. And the same we need to experience because where do we want to go? Where is our ultimate goal? The heaven, heavenly Canaan. And the Lord wants to take us to heaven. But before we get there, we need to be fitted for heaven. And this, we have the wilderness experience. And what would be the wilderness for us? Mhm. What would be the wilderness for us? Let me read you the next paragraph that I have prepared here. In manuscripts release, page 76 from 1905, says that there is not a family, not one family in 100 who will be improved physically, mentally, or spiritually by residing in the city. Faith, hope, love, happiness can far better be gained in retired places where there are fields and hills and trees. And more than that, says that take your children away from the sights and sounds of the city, away from the rattle and din of streetcars and teams, and their minds will become more healthy. It will be found easier to bring home to their hearts the truth of the Word of God. So, in other words, when Moses was in Egypt, he couldn't have a good relationship with God. He had to go out and build that experience. And after having that experience, that wilderness experience, he was prepared for the job that God was preparing him for. And also, the people, we learned a few Sabbaths ago about the people of Israel. When God took them out, where did they go? Where did God took them to? To Mount Sinai, right? And what was the reason for them to go to Mount Sinai? To be re-educated, because they forgot the holiness of God. You saw that even the experience of Lot, being in the city, what happened to him? Probably he thought maybe, well, we go there, and like even Abraham, when he was praying for the city, what did he pray for? Because he thought that there will be many converted people there. So Lot probably had this thought too. Well, we convert those people, the church will be rich. But by associating himself with those people, we see that he couldn't see sin in its real image. So that's why the Lord is taking us, and we had this call to go to live in a country for many years already. And you see why it's beneficial. It will be found easier to bring home the hearts of the children, but even our hearts, where? To the truth of the Word of God. And why is that? Probably some of you started this process already, like to move into the country. And you can testify by being there, you have time to think. You have time to talk to God. You have time to be educated by God. Like recently, we just cutted some trees around, and one tree fell, and when it fell, damaged some other trees because some of the branches broke. But some branches, you could see that they are just half broke, like they are still attached to the tree. Do you think that those branches are still alive, even half connected to the tree? They withered. So what can we learn from there? We understand better the Bible because Jesus says that if you are connected with me, like here is the vine, we are the branches. If the branch is disconnected from the vine, what happens to the branch? Dies. So there are different lessons that we can learn from nature. But also look at this next paragraph saying that never can the proper education be given to the youth in this country or any other country unless they are separated. How? A wide distance from the cities. So maybe you think, well, I'm going to Peru, I'm going uh, to Romania, to China, to some other places where the cities are not so modern like here. But as you see here, not even in this country, not in every other country, can the children be educated unless they are separated a wide distance from the city. And we see that even when God created Adam and Eve, what was their home? Hmm? The garden. What was their school? The garden. What was their job? The garden. What was their church? The garden again. So, and here I liked something. As you look, the last two lines here says that, but the employment itself was not given because of sin. So they had to work even before they fell into sin. And later on says that the great master himself did what? Bless the work of tilling the soil. And you may say that country living is wilderness because it's not easy. You go, you have to mow the grass every other week. You have to till, you have to weed, you have to take care of the poison ivy or whatever is there. And that's coming again and again. But what was the reason for this work given? To educate us. And as you look here, the first line says that God gave to our first parents the means of true education when he instructed them to do what? To till the soil and care for their garden home. So this was, even though they were created perfect with holy purposes, holy thoughts, they still needed to be educated. Well, how much more we today? We prepare to go to that promised land, the new Canaan. Do we need to be educated for that? Do we need to be instructed or prepared? And also, the work, it's hard, but we see that this is a blessing that God blessed. So one of the reasons to be out in the wilderness or in the country, in our words, in our modern language, it's this to be properly educated, to know who God is, to become more acquainted with him. And another reason is we know the signs of the times. We know the prophecies concerning the end times. And also, I found this article it's found in the World Economic Forum. And the title says something like that: Welcome to 2030s. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. Do you like this statement? And I heard Brother Nehemiah saying a few times why most of the world were under the communist reign. Because communism, when it was presented in such a light that everyone liked to embrace it. So even this, for us, probably we don't like it now. But when you look at this, it says that I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. I don't know how they made these wordings, but they don't really sound well. It says that, welcome to my city, or I should say our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. It might seem odd to you, but it makes perfect sense for us in this city. Everything you considered a product has now become a service. We have access to transportation, accommodation, food of all the things we need in our daily lives. One by one, all these things became free, so it ended up not making sense for us to own much. And if you look at this, probably for those who own something today, for them it's harder to accept this. But imagine those being in debt for so many years. Those that have nothing and they are struggling to have something. For them, it will be easier to compromise into that. But I like the next part saying that my biggest concern is all the people who do not live in our city, those we lost on the way, those who decided that it became too much, all this technology, those who felt obsolete and useless when robots and artificial intelligence took over big parts of our jobs, those who got upset with the political system and turned against it. They live different kind of lives outside of the city. Some have formed little self-supplying communities. Others just stayed in the empty and abandoned houses in small 19th century villages. So you see, first is talking about a city where everyone dwells there happy, meaning they don't own anything, but they have everything. Before they couldn't afford a car, but now they have free transportation. They couldn't afford the clothes that they saw others wearing, but now they can. And on the other hand, says that my biggest concern are the people that do not live in the city, that do not live like us. And who are these people? Those who decided, as you see here, they felt obsolete and useless when robots and all those technology took over. They wanted to live different kind of lives outside the city, meaning self-supplying communities, people that they eat from what they plant, people that they do not need to be dependent on that city. So thinking about all this and looking at the prices today, you all experience this. Going to grocery, everything is, you name it, high, right? So if we don't learn today how to become self-sufficiency or to try, we don't need to be 100% right now, but we still need to know how to survive in cases like that. In those times, it will be easy to compromise truth or faith, or as Sister Hadley mentioned, when time for us to the call comes, we hesitate because we think, well, I go there, I don't know what to do. All that weeding, that's hard work. I rather stay here or nothing, but be in this situation. The reason I brought this is because in Revelation chapter 13, we know this Bible prophecy that it says that there is the time when it says that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. And I already commented on this. But if we think about that in Proverbs chapter 27:12, look at this proverb, what it says, that a prudent man does what? Foreseeth evil. And does what? Hideth himself. In other words, when he sees it, he does something to prepare himself for that. But the simple pass on and are punished. So if we think back to this question, are we attached to Egypt? Or are we able to move on if the time comes? There is also the prophecy that says that ere long there will be such strife and confusion in the cities that those who wish to leave them will not be able. We must be preparing for these issues. This is the light that is given to me. So what does this paragraph say? That there will be a time when people want to leave, but they are not able to anymore. And it will be a strife. And says that we must be preparing for these issues. And what does the last says, the last line, that this is what? The light that is given to me. This is the light that is given to us today as well. And it says that some of our people who are living in the poisoned atmosphere of the cities might profitably secure a few acres of this land. They could support themselves by raising fruit and vegetables and poultry. So if we think about that, we had instructions about that. We have the call. But sometimes we think, well, maybe it's not right now. As I mentioned about me being a child, I wanted Jesus to come. Then growing up, I wanted to place his coming a little later until I have some money too or other things. So when we do like that, it says that the time may come when we want to live, but it's impossible for us to live. And there is another issue that we should look at this morning. It's when we go towards Canaan, we have to pass through wilderness. But we shouldn't bring Egypt to the wilderness. Because that's what happened to the Israelites. God told them to go out. They finally accepted to go out. But what was the turning point? Remember that question, who shall give us something to eat, right? Where did that came from? From Egypt. They brought all the Egypt desires with them. They wanted to be in the wilderness, but they wanted the comfort of Egypt. So the same we should think even about us. Like we move to the country, the wilderness in our days, I would say, we shouldn't bring the city to the country. And in 1 John chapter 2, we have the words saying that love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And what happens with that? Again, what we discussed during the break time. All these things are going to pass. And you see that the world passeth away, and also the lust, where all those desires, they will pass away. But he that does the will of God does what? Abideth forever. Amen. So may the Lord help us, because as we think about that, we are on the way to the heavenly Canaan. And we want that our Christian experience to progress. Like if you remember Peter's ladder, we like to memorize it. But as you look at it, today is one step, tomorrow is another step, until we reach the heavenly Canaan. So may the Lord help us on that. And also remember not to bring cities to the country, because I told you about the experience of Lot. And do you remember what was his experience as he was going? You see that when he got there, he was negotiating with the Lord. He got in the wilderness in a way, but when he saw everything, what is going on, says that, behold, now this city is near to flee unto. And it is a little one, isn't it? By comparing Sodom to this city that he saw, it's a smaller version of that. Like, it cannot be as bad as Sodom. It's just a smaller city. Isn't not a little one? And my soul shall live. And what happened because of this? How many were saved because of this? So we know that when he left Sodom, how many were with him? His wife, his two daughters. So there were 4 together. On the way, his wife, instead of looking forward to the promise, where did she look? Back to what was she attached to? And now when he went to this city, we see that even his daughters were lost. And for us, I would like to just conclude with some other paragraphs here. It says that it is not time now for God's people to be fixing their affections or laying up their treasures in the world. The time is not far distant when, like the early disciples, we shall be forced to seek a refuge in desolate and solitary places. As the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman armies was the signal for flight to the Judean Christians, so the assumption of power on the part of our nation in the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath will be a warning for us. It will then be time to leave the large cities, preparatory to leaving the smaller ones for retired homes in secluded places among the mountains. So when you look here, you see that there is a progress that should happen. It says that in that time, when we see those things happening, what shall we do? It's time to leave even the preparatory cities, to leave even the smaller cities. So that's a progress. Like when we move from the bigger cities, go to smaller ones, become acquainted with the land, with planting something, then moving to retired homes in secluded places. But even then, we should look for the time when we go to the mountains. So this time, I don't know how far you are in this process, but as we looked here, we want to reach the heavenly Canaan, but we must have this wilderness experience. And especially as we look at this paragraph here, it says that as we approach the close of times, as the people of God stand upon the borders of the heavenly Canaan, Satan will, as of old, do what? Redouble his efforts to prevent them from entering the goodly land. He lays his snares for every soul. So, how is he doing that? He's redoubling his efforts in such a way that we are more attached to this lifestyle. And when God wants us to educate us in wilderness, we want to have the same comfort that we had back in Egypt or back in the cities. But let us remember that we are always longing for a better country. As we read about these people of faith, they confessed, they said that these all died in the faith, not having received the promises. But look at this verse here. It says that they have seen what? Afar off. What does that mean? Was their life easy? Their life wasn't easy. But what gave them courage to go further in that wilderness process? The hope of that promise. And that's why it's important for us to read those promises. It's important for us to know more about this heavenly Canaan, because when trials come, we know what we are fighting for. So may the Lord help us that we may understand that we are just passing through this earth, we are strangers, pilgrims on this earth, but our ultimate goal is the heavenly Canaan. And for this,